Hi everyone, this is Ryan Regan, the founding partner of HKExcel. So I'm making this video today because I know a lot of IB students in economics are confused about externalities. They get confused about externality, they don't understand it, right? The market failure chapter. Okay, so that's why today I'm making this free video for you to explain to you market failure externality. Okay? This video is going to be the most useful video you'll ever find on YouTube, I guarantee you. Okay? And normally this stuff I'm teaching is only available in our paid lessons, right? Like with our IB experts under our team. But now I'm making this video to give just the most important part of this for you for free, because we want to help more IB students. Okay? So pay attention if you're confused about market failure externalities. Now, as I said, this video is designed to help you to understand market failure, right? So if you have anything you don't understand, comment below and I'll answer them. Answer your questions. If you have any question, you're watching this, you don't understand it, I guarantee you I'll answer your questions in the comment in YouTube. Okay, so please do comment if you have any questions. And if you have other topics you're confused with, you can register for a free trial in the description. Okay, so if you think that this video helped you and you want more videos like this one, more lessons like this one, you can actually register for a free trial in the link in the description. All right, before we go into technical stuff, you need to first have an idea what are externalities. Externalities refers to effects on third parties. Okay, so externalities can be positive or negative, right? And it can be from the production activities or from the consumption activities. Okay, so essentially there are four types of externality: positive production, positive consumption, negative production, and negative consumption, right? Okay, so just remember, externalities refers to effects on third parties. They can be positive or negative, and it could be from production or consumption. Okay, actually it's quite common sense. So for example, negative consumption externality, it means that the consumption of a good have negative effects on third parties, right? For example, cigarettes, because when you smoke cigarettes, it negatively harms other people, right? What about positive consumption? Positive consumption means that the consumption activity has a positive effect on third parties. So for example, education. When an individual consumes education, he becomes more productive, and this benefits the entire society, right? Now, and the negative production, it means that the production activity had negative effects on third parties. So what's negative production? So for example, when a factory pollutes, right? So it's a production activity, but it harms other people. Like there are negative effects on the entire society, on other people. That's why it's negative production. And then there is also a positive production. So it means that the production activity has positive effects on third parties. So how can a production activity have positive benefits? So for example, an accounting firm, when it produces its services, when it provides its services, it will train workers, it will train up new accountants, and these accountants become part of the labor force of the economy and can benefit the entire economy. Right after these accountants leave to other accounting firms, they can actually benefit other accounting firms. So this is why it's positive. It's a positive production externality. It's a production activity that has positive side effects on the society. Right? Got it? So now, if you get this, we will go into more technical areas. Let us look at the diagram. So I know a lot of students are concerned about how to draw the correct diagrams, right? So this is what we are going to look at, okay? How to draw the diagrams, okay? So let's look at the diagram. So in microeconomics, we learn about demand and supply, right? The equilibrium price is where demand equals supply. So this is the equilibrium. Demand, supply, the intersection, okay, it's the equilibrium. Okay, and another thing you need to know is that the supply curve is essentially the same as the MPC, okay, marginal private cost. And the demand curve is equal to the marginal private benefit. You don't need to know why, you just need to memorize this. In university, if you study economics, you would need to know why, but not here. Okay, so what's marginal private cost? Marginal private cost, so actually it's quite self-explanatory. Marginal private cost, so it's private and it's cost, right? So it's about the producer. So it's the way you define it is that it's the cost of producing an extra unit of a good to the producer, right? Private is only to the producer. Remember that, not to the society, it's to the producer, right? And marginal private benefit is the benefit of consuming an extra unit of the good to the consumers, right? Private refers to only related to the consumer. So that's why it's marginal private benefit. Okay? But then there's another term called marginal social cost. Marginal social cost and marginal social benefit. Marginal social cost is about the society. It's the cost of producing an extra unit to the society, while marginal social benefit is the benefit of consuming an extra unit to the society. Okay, so social benefit and social cost. Now in this diagram, you can see marginal private benefit is equal to the marginal private cost is equal to the marginal social cost. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, so it means that the cost to the producer is equal to the cost to the society. So in this case, actually what this diagram shows is a situation without externalities. So without any externalities in production, without any production externalities, the private cost would be equal to the social cost, right? Because the production only affects the producer. It does not affect any other third parties. So this is why it would only affect the producer, and therefore the private cost is equal to the social cost. In other words, the cost to the producer is equal to the cost to the society. Now, private benefit and social benefit. So private benefit, in this diagram, you can see private benefit is the same as the social benefit. Private benefit refers to the benefit to the consumer, while social benefit refers to the benefit to the entire society. So what you notice is that the benefit to the consumer is same as the benefit to the society in this particular diagram. So in other words, there is no externalities. And because there are no externalities, the benefit to the consumer is the same as the benefit to the society, right? Because the consumption of this good does not affect any person apart from the consumer. So that's why the benefit to the consumer would be the benefit to the society, right? So this diagram shows you the situation without externalities. So you can see without externalities, MPC equals MSC, MPB equals MSB. So in this case, the market equilibrium, this is the market equilibrium, right here. The market equilibrium is also socially optimal. Why? Because if you have learned in school or in textbooks, where MSC meets MSB, where MSC and MSB intersects, that is the socially optimum point. So this point right here is the equilibrium, as I've explained. It's also the socially optimum point. Right, so therefore, in this case, without externalities, the free market equilibrium is actually socially optimal. You get that? Very important. When there are no externalities, the market equilibrium, where MPC equals MPB, is also socially optimal, where MSC equals MSB. Right? Now, the reason why externalities screw up the market is because when there are externalities, the MPC, for example, when there are production externalities, the MPC won't be the same as the MSC anymore. I'll explain that in detail later. When there are consumption externalities, the MPB will not be the same as the MSB anymore, right? So therefore, as you'll see later, if there are externalities, it screws up the situation, and the market equilibrium will no longer be socially optimal. And this is why externalities create a market failure, and I'll show you in detail later. So here I have a very clear summary table. As I've told you just now, there are 4 types of externality: negative production, negative consumption, positive production, and positive consumption. Now, let us only look at consumption externalities first. Only consumption externalities. Okay, so consumption externalities, whenever it's about the consumption, remember, it has to do with the demand curve, the downward sloping curve. So the way I remember it is that it has to do with the demand curve. So the MPB and the MSB are different, basically. So you draw 2 demand curves. So when you draw a diagram for consumption externalities, you always draw 2 demand curves and 1 supply curve, because we know that the social benefit is not the same as private benefit. Okay, we focus on the demand curves. So negative consumption. So actually, it's quite simple. You just need to ask yourself, if something has negative consumption externalities, is the benefit for the consumer greater or the benefit for the society? Who does it benefit more? So as you know, negative consumption externalities means that it has negative effects on the society, right? On other people. So obviously, the private benefit is greater than the social benefit, as you can see here, as I've highlighted here, because it negatively harms the society. So for example, if there's secondhand smoking, the social benefit will be less than the private benefit, right? And then if it's positive, let's say education, it benefits the society. So that's why the social benefit exceeds the private benefit. Okay, so that's why for consumption externality, you pretty much just need to remember this. Okay, like you just need to be able to make sense of this. So negative consumption, MPB greater than MSB. When it's greater, we mean that the curve is on top. Okay, so I'll show you the diagram. Negative consumption externality. I'll find that for you. Negative consumption externality would be here. So we can see the MPB is greater than the MSB. You can see it right here, right? The MPB is larger than MPB, as I've explained. MSB, as I explained just now. MPB larger than MSB. Okay, and then you draw one supply curve. That's it. Okay, two demand curves and one supply curve, with the MPB being larger than the MSB. If it's positive consumption, it's also two demand curves, but now MSB is greater than the MPB, right? So, and then you draw one supply curve. Okay. Now let's move on to the production externalities. Production externalities, you can see, it will always draw two supply curves because production has to do with the supply. So draw two supply curves. And so one is the MSC, one is the MPC. You just need to think which one is higher, MSC or MPC, right? So negative production, it means that the production have negative effects on third parties, right? Production have negative effects on society. So think, is the social cost greater or the private cost? So obviously it's the social cost, right? Because it harms the society as a side effect. So that's why the social cost is higher than the private cost. Okay, if it's positive production externality, it's the opposite. Now it benefits the society, so the cost for society will be less. Okay, if we look at the diagram, we would exactly find this. So negative production externality, right? The MSC is higher than the MPC. Okay, MSC is higher than the MPC. And if it's positive production, it's MPC would be higher than the MSC, right? So whichever is higher, the curve is on top. Simple enough, right? So now you should just if they ask you to draw negative, I'll give you an example. If they ask you to draw negative consumption, what would you do? So first, you know that it's consumption, so you draw two demand curves, right? So you draw two demand curves like in here. And then you know that if it's negative consumption, you think, okay, is the private benefit more or the social benefit? So if you think logically, it's the private benefit because it harms the society. So the social benefit must be less. Okay, then, so you draw the two curves, MPB and MSB, MPB being on top of the MSB, as you should see here. Now, what you can label next is essentially the so there are 2 points. The market equilibrium. Where's the market equilibrium? The market equilibrium is where demand equals supply. It's where the MSC or the MPC equals to the private benefit. Okay, so the equilibrium is where the private benefit equals to the private cost. Okay, so it's actually in here, it's P1 and Q1 because that's where the private benefit equals to the private cost. P1, Q1. So right here, this is the market equilibrium. But then how about the socially optimum point? The socially optimum point is where MSC equals MSB, right? So you just need to find, next you need to find the socially optimum point. It's where MSC equals MSB, so it's here. Q star and P star, this is a socially optimum point where MSC equals MSB. So we can see the market equilibrium is larger than the socially optimum point. So that's why we say there's market failure. When there's negative externalities of consumption, the market equilibrium would always be higher than the socially optimum point. So in a way, the free market fails to allocate resources efficiently. And this is the meaning of market failure. When the market does not allocate resources efficiently, we can see it from this example. So I'll give you another example, right? Let's say it's here. Let's see, this one, right? So negative production externalities. Negative production. So a social cost is greater than a private cost. We draw two supply curves. Social cost higher than private cost. And then we just identified the market equilibrium. Market equilibrium is where the private cost equals the private benefit. You can see here it's right social benefit, but actually there should be social benefit equal private benefit. Okay, so this is the market equilibrium where private cost equals to the private benefit here, P1 and Q1. Okay, right here. But then the market equilibrium is P1, Q1, but the socially optimum point is where MSC equals MSB. That should be PE and QE, this point right here. Okay, that's the socially optimum point. So we can see when there are negative production externalities, the market equilibrium is higher than the socially optimum point. The market equilibrium quantity is greater. So therefore, there is market failure because the market fails to allocate resources efficiently. Okay. So another example, let's say positive consumption. So positive consumption, we draw two two demand curves, right? MSB and MPB. MSB is higher, the social benefit is higher than the private benefit. And then we can identify the market equilibrium. The market equilibrium is where MPB equals MPC, so it will be at P1 and Q1. But the socially optimum point is where MSC equals MSB, so that's P star and Q star. So we can see the market equilibrium is Q1, but the socially optimum quantity is Q star. So now, when there are positive consumption externalities, there's underconsumption of the good, right? So now, you know how to draw the diagram. Only one step is missing. It's the welfare loss, okay? So a lot of students get confused how to label the welfare loss, how do we know how to identify it in the diagram. I'll show you a simple trick, okay? Very simple trick, you can draw it very easily. And then after I show you the trick, I'll explain to you how to explain it as well. Okay, so what's the simple trick? So the simple trick is that the welfare loss always points towards the socially optimum quantity. So if we look here, I'll show you, in every example that is true. So negative production externality, the equilibrium is QE, right? You can see it, QE right here, the equilibrium is QE. You can see the welfare loss is pointing towards QE. It's pointing towards QE. Can you see that? So that's why this is the triangle. It should be this one. It's pointing towards QE. It won't be this triangle because that's not pointing to QE. It's the triangle that's pointing towards the socially optimum point. Remember, the welfare loss points towards the socially optimum point. Okay, let's look at the second example, positive production. This is the optimum equilibrium, the optimum quantity. We can see that the welfare loss or the potential welfare gain points towards the equilibrium quantity. Point towards the optimum quantity. It points towards the optimum quantity. The next example, we can also see it pointing towards the optimum quantity, Q star. This is the socially optimum quantity. The potential welfare gain is pointing towards Q star. Okay? And then here, Q star is a socially optimal. Again, the welfare loss is pointing towards Q star. So, okay, so when you draw the diagram, that's very easy. You point it towards Q star. Okay? Now, finally, I want to explain to you why there's welfare loss or potential welfare gain. Why is that the case? So I'll show you. Let's look at this case. Okay? We can see the equilibrium is here. The socially optimum quantity is QE. Yeah, the equilibrium is QE. But the socially optimum quantity is QE, but the equilibrium is Q1. So in this case, we can see that there is overproduction. The equilibrium quantity exceeds the socially optimum quantity, right? We can see that the main thing is that QE to Q1, these units actually should not have been produced. These units were units that are being overproduced. They shouldn't have been produced. And between QE to Q1, we can see the MSC curve is higher than MSB. So the social cost is higher than the social benefit. So for all of these units that shouldn't be produced, the social cost is higher than the social benefit. Therefore, there is welfare loss because the social cost exceeds social benefit from QE to Q1. And these units the free market have produced, but these units should not have been produced in the first place because it's higher than the socially optimum quantity. Okay? Actually, it's the same logic for negative consumption externality. Okay, we can see the socially optimal is Q star, but the equilibrium is Q1, right? So there's overconsumption. And between Q star to Q1, these quantities shouldn't have been produced. But for these units that shouldn't have been produced, the MSC is higher than the MSB. So therefore, there's welfare loss. For all of these extra units produced, the social cost exceeds the social benefit. So that's it. Now, if it's positive, let's say positive consumption, you can see now it's a different case because now we say there's underconsumption. The equilibrium is Q1, but the optimal is Q star. So the free market is not consuming enough. It's consuming an amount that is less than the socially optimal. And we can see Q1 to Q star, these units, they should have been produced, but they weren't produced by the free market. So that's why we say there's underconsumption in the free market. And for these underconsumed units, we can see that the MSB is higher than the MSC. The MSB curve is higher than the MSC curve. So for all of these units, the social benefit actually is higher than the social cost. But then these units weren't produced. That's why we say there's a potential welfare gain. Okay? If these units were produced, there would be a welfare gain because the social benefit exceeds the social cost. Okay? So I hope you understand the market failure now. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. Okay, and I'll answer you very, very soon, and there are more free resources as well. Okay, I really hope that this video solves all of your problems with market failure. Okay, so see you next time.